Yay, awesome. So my name is Jorge Castro. I've been working in open source most of my professional career. I started in open source around 2004. I've been fortunate to work on a lot of open source projects such as Ubuntu, OpenStack, and now Kubernetes.
And I'm Dawn Foster. So I've been working in open source for 20-some years now. So I've worked on lots of projects. I was at Puppet for a while as director of community. I was the community lead for Intel's Open Source Technology Center, and now I'm doing open source Kubernetes contributor strategy and the program that goes along with it at Pivotal. Open source can be a really small world sometimes, right? While we both work on Kubernetes now, we've actually known each other and worked together when I was at Puppet, and George was at Canonical, and we were both working on config management ages ago.
Open source is big, but it's not that big. When you do this professionally for a long time, you meet a lot of people who work on different projects and who tend to know each other. So you might end up meeting someone down the road. Software evolves and changes constantly. And while you're gonna end up becoming an expert in the software, there's no better investment than in the people that you will be collaborating with throughout your open source career. So why even participate? For many of us, Kubernetes is a basic building block of infrastructure and a significant amount of effort to implement across your businesses. You can merely just consume Kubernetes as a product, and that's totally fine. But something open source has taught us is that getting involved and contributing ensures that your organization has the knowledge and expertise to shape the thing that runs our platform. So think of it as an investment. It's nice to be able to use a tool with enough proficiency instead of just blindly trusting that something works in production. So you might say, I'm gonna get into Kubernetes. Your boss told you, we got a Kubernetes, what do? You Google, you end up at the website, you end up at the community page, and that leads you to the community repo. You might find the calendar. So we're gonna kind of give you a deep dive or a guide-like. Think of us as a lighthouse on all of this stuff that you're gonna find on the internet and kind of give you a general idea of where to go so you can find out what you need to be successful. So we're gonna do some definitions here. How many of you have been hearing the term SIGs all week, right? Special interest group. This is the basic working unit of Kubernetes. SIGs own specific sections of code. So when you look in the community repo, you will find that each part is assigned to a separate SIG. SIG meetings are all public. All of their meetings are recorded and available to YouTube, and anyone in the community can participate in a SIG meeting. There are no secret cabal meetings of any kind. So you definitely want to check those out. In turn, SIGs are divided into working groups. This is very large, complicated. As we get more contributors, we have to subdivide things even further. So you might see in a SIG a certain amount of sub-projects that kind of divides all the things that the SIGs are responsible for into much more manageable chunks. And each of these sub-projects might have their own meetings, their own YouTube videos, and things of that nature. Further on, we have working groups. So sometimes there might be a thing that needs to involve multiple SIGs, because you can't just change a thing and affect a bunch of people, right? So while SIGs do concentrate on their areas of the code, they do need to be loosely coupled enough to work together when something touches things across the code base. So they might do something like form a working group as a temporary working unit that they can collaborate with, maybe for a year, 6 months or whatever, and then when they accomplish their mission, we merely fold the working group back. These are constantly evolving, adding, and being removed. There are 3 committees: the steering committee, which we'll get to later, the product security committee, which is the ones that publish all the CVEs that you see, and the last is the code of conduct committee, which handles code of conduct issues. And then we have user groups, which is our newest construct. These are more formalized ways for users to be able to support themselves and organize around not developing Kubernetes, but helping you find a place for you to get help among people that might have similar goals as you. And then the user group might be able to feed that information back to the developers, so we have a nice tight feedback loop from what we're building to what people are actually using and how they're using it. So, like everything else in Kubernetes, we define the community with a YAML file. I would love to have a really great URL for you, but just go to Google and type sigs.yaml. Yeah, it is a thing. So each one of these things, the SIG name, what they do, when they meet, the Zoom URL, the link to their notes, the link to their archives, all of these things are maintained in a YAML file, and of course we don't make you read that. We do generate a user-friendly page This is a SIG list. This is a thing that sits on my bookmarks toolbar. And what we do is we give you a nice lead of who the co-chairs are, the people, and the links, like I said, to the YouTube videos, their meetings, and things like that. And then we take all of that, and then you draw it into a prettier picture here. Do not be overwhelmed when you see this. You're like, how do I get involved with Kubernetes? And you start with this picture, and you're like, I'm out of here, and you're walking out of the room, right? This is very complex software. What we're trying to do here when you build a platform is a thing. So don't even worry if this is too complex for you. The people who created this can't even recite this to you. So, and that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Distributed systems, you can just do your one little thing, and as long as you're doing your thing, everything will be fine. So this is just a diagram of all those SIGs. A lot of their titles are self-descriptive, but we'll get into some of them here in a little bit. And of course, here's the calendar, sigs.yaml. You can just add that to your calendar, and all of the meetings that we're about to go through will be available to you. And the calendar entries have, again, the link to the notes and their YouTube links and all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to start with Monday, and it would be crazy for any project to schedule things on Mondays. But we have to do a bunch of stuff, so we have to. So there are lots of SIGs here. We're not going to cover each one. Christoph and Nikita have a SIG Contributor Experience deep dive today at 4:25. The rooms just changed, so please check the schedule, where Contributor Experience will kind of do a deep dive here, and we will get into more detail about all the things that we're talking about here today. So there are a few SIGs that meet on Monday. I'm going to just talk about a few of them here. SIG apps might be a place that is interesting for a lot of you. The purpose for this SIG is to discuss running and defining applications in Kubernetes, right? So this is places where you find people from Helm, Compose, and the Workload API. This is a very large SIG, and is usually a place that lots of people participate. And then the second one I want to talk about a little bit is SIG release. So you don't have to be an engineer to help Kubernetes. And SIG release is a very well-organized place that's really set up to have shadows, mentors. They have little playbooks on what your job is, and you can just read the whole thing. And it's a really fun and positive way to contribute with a lot of experts who will ensure that if you want to participate, that you will succeed. It's really fantastic. I've done it 3 times. And then on Tuesday, we're still on Monday. We haven't even gotten to Tuesday. SIG Cluster LifeCycle is a very large SIG. You will find them on every slide from now on. So they have 20 sub-projects, and they have something going on every single day. This SIG concentrates on everything from the installation of Kubernetes to it's time for an upgrade, what do I do? So there's a lot of stuff on their plate, so you're going to see a lot of that if you're interested in that.
So Tuesdays are actually our biggest day. We have 17 meetings on Tuesdays alone. We're a global community, right? We have meetings around the world, across a whole bunch of different time zones. And as you can see from the slide, the Kubernetes meeting schedule is absolutely bonkers on certain days. And Tuesday is one of those days. So we give each SIG full control over their own schedules for meetings at time zones that they choose, which is how we end up with meetings scheduled across wildly different time zones. So you need to make sure that you actually know when meetings happen. And knowing which time zone your meetings are in is especially important during the weeks when the US switches to and from daylight savings time at a different time than the rest of us in the world change our time zones, which creates all kinds of calendar chaos because it depends on where the meeting was scheduled and what time zone it's in, and whether or not it shifts a bit. And a lot of the SIGs and working groups really do try to have meetings that are friendly to people in a variety of different locations. So it can be hard as a project to find people to host meetings in certain time zones and grow participation in various regions. So if you're interested in growing participation in a particular part of the project in a particular region, that's something that we do a lot of. Now, because the 8 regular SIG meetings on the last slide were not enough to keep us busy, we also have 5 sub-project meetings across 4 SIGs on Tuesdays. Several of these are office hours, which are places where anyone can bring questions or topics for discussion. So these are a really great place to get started with a SIG, especially if you come in with some questions. And just to keep it going, because it's Tuesday and there are so many meetings, we also have 4 working group meetings, including some interesting topics like long-term support and multi-tenancy, which are big areas for Kubernetes in particular.
All right, moving on to Wednesday, our second busiest day. The first one I'm going to talk about here is Contributor Experience, which is the SIG that we belong to. We're kind of tasked with ensuring that contributing to Kubernetes is like a wonderful experience. So if you're absolutely confused and all of these words for those SIGs are confusing to you, consider us your homeroom, like in school, right? You would go, I have no place to be. And we have a selection of people here, raise your hands, yay. Who our entire task is just to like find you a home here, right? So feel free to stop by a SIG Contributor Experience meeting, hop on a few times. I've had people come and then say, hey, you know, I kind of found my thing in networking. I'm not going to be around anymore. And it's like, well, that's awesome for you. So feel free to use us as a resource to getting you where you need to be. SIG Cloud Provider, I want to point out, those of you that might have been casually following Kubernetes in the past, there used to be SIGs for each of the cloud providers, SIG AWS, SIG OpenStack, SIG Azure, and so on. What's happening now is that has all been consolidated as subprojects underneath SIG Cloud Providers. So just a note there. So if you're interested in cloud provider stuff, SIG Cloud Provider is the place to be. And then lastly, I want to talk about Workgroup Kubernetes, or Kate's Infra. This is, especially if you come from an operations background, this is an excellent place that's always looking for volunteers. These are the people that are running the infrastructure to do the things that we need to publish Kubernetes binaries, make releases happen, and all that kind of stuff. Someone has to run DNS for Kubernetes.io, right? So if you have that kind of expertise, if you're an SRE or something, that is a fantastic place to get started. And then these are the other SIGs that meet on Wednesday. The one I want to point out here is SIG API Machinery. Remember, Kubernetes is all about APIs. So if you're building and extending Kubernetes, keeping an eye on this SIG will end up saving you lots of time. APIs change, they get deprecated. And this is a place, if you have architect in your title, is a good SIG to keep track of because it will actually save you time in the long run to understand the changes that are coming in Kubernetes itself. We do have 2 special programs that meet on Wednesdays also. On the first Wednesday of every month, we have our Meet Our Contributors program. This is where we go and do a live stream on YouTube. You join Slack and you can ask Kubernetes maintainers questions about contributing to Kubernetes. So maybe you need help doing your first pull request. Maybe you need help doing a code walkthrough. Maybe you have an architecture question. You can submit these questions either as yourself or anonymously. It's just a safe place where you say, you know what, there's a bunch of experienced contributors here, and I have questions about how to actually get involved. And this is just a place where you can ask a lot of questions, and it is a really fun program to be involved in. The second one is Kubernetes Office Hours. This is a sister program that we ask Kubernetes experts to just sit on a panel, and again, we just live stream on YouTube for an hour, and we try to answer as many user questions for people that are using and consuming Kubernetes. So we make this a fun program. We give away t-shirts. We live stream the YouTube channel on the side. We have people from the community that join, sharing their resources, links, blog posts, and it's a really fun place to be. This is on the 3rd Wednesday of every month, and it's a good investment if you know Kubernetes, but you don't have a lot of time. We can just put you on the rotation of panelists, and you can get involved. That's where Chris McCarty started at Office Hours, 1 hour a month, and this KubeCon, he's doing his very first KubeCon talk. So you can start small, and then as you feel confident, feel free to move on your journey.
Okay, so now we're up to Thursday, where we also have a whole bunch of meetings. So like API Machinery, which George talked about, SIG Architecture meets on Thursdays. And it's also a really interesting and important SIG to know about if you do anything related to architecture. They maintain and evolve the design of Kubernetes to maintain architectural consistency across the project. So this includes API governance to help establish conventions and consistency across both the system and the user-facing APIs. And like George mentioned, Kubernetes has a huge focus on APIs. They're also responsible for conformance definitions and code organization. So if you're building Kubernetes distributions, this is incredibly important. And if you're involved in Kubernetes at all, it really is kind of a good idea to at least sort of keep an eye on what they're doing within SIG architecture. And you can find their regular SIG meeting here on Thursdays. We also, I mentioned earlier, the global nature of the community. We have our Contributor Experience APAC time zone meetings on Thursdays. So we're a global community with a meeting for almost everyone, regardless of where you are in the world and what you're interested in. SIG Docs really does demonstrate the global nature of the community, with teams focused on German, Spanish, French, Hindi, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Chinese, and probably some others that I'm forgetting about. But SIG Docs is really a great place to start contributing. Anyone, absolutely anyone, can contribute to documentation. And not just for localization, right? I just talked about localization, but having people who are new to the project review the docs and make suggestions or contributions can be really, really valuable for the project. So don't underestimate the importance of having new people with fresh eyes and different assumptions who can maybe find errors, notice some gaps, or help improve some places where something maybe isn't as clear as it could be. So SIG Docs is really a great place to get started as a contributor, and it's a super friendly SIG. The community meetings are one of the best ways to stay up to date on a huge variety of things happening across the entire Kubernetes community. We meet on Thursdays, 10 a.m. Pacific. We have shout outs, announcements, updates from SIGs and working groups. And we're in the process of changing these from weekly to something a little less frequent, so stay tuned while we sort of figure out the details. But the next one is on December 5th, which is the week after the US Thanksgiving holiday coming up. And the best part is that anyone can sign up to host the meeting, which George says is just like hosting Saturday Night Live. And I think he's exaggerating a little bit, but it's still loads of fun to host the community meeting. I've done it a few times, and it's just a lot of fun. So Fridays, we can relax a little bit. Fewer meetings, super light meeting days. You can just relax, get maybe a head start into the weekend, which is why this is a picture of Kubernetes relaxing on the beach with a fruity cocktail. That's not me. Unless, like me, all of my work meetings get scheduled on Friday. So instead of having Kubernetes meetings on Friday, I just seem to end up with a bunch of work meetings, which cuts into my relaxing on the beach with fruity drinks time. But it is nice to have one late meeting day for the project. This is actually all of the meetings, so just those three.
There are some other activities that are happening outside of Kubernetes as well that we just want you to be cognizant of. I'll get to that in a second, but first let me hit elections. So once a year in the fall, we do have elections. This is for the Kubernetes Steering Committee. It's a 7-member body who oversees the governance of the Kubernetes project, and these are fully elected members by the contributors of Kubernetes. And just like a SIG, they publish notes, they have public meetings, they have a YouTube archive of all the stuff that you can check out, and there's a lot of great information in there. Of the current Kubernetes organizational members, 859 people were eligible to vote, so that's really the core group of Kubernetes contributors there.
And we, of course, have KubeCon, CloudNativeCon, so if you're here, you know that. But did you also know that we do them in China and the EU? So the next event's in Amsterdam at the end of March. And we also do contributor summits the day before every KubeCon. So if you missed the one on Monday for this KubeCon, you can try again in Amsterdam. We also have Kubernetes Forums. So the next two are in Seoul and Sydney, and those are coming up in December. And the forums are joint events that run consecutively for 2 days each in 2 cities in kind of the same region during the same week, with the idea that they can sort of get speakers at kind of a 2-for-1 discount. So they get them to speak at 2 events in the same region, and it cuts down on travel costs, and they can get some better speakers that way.
So far, we've only been overwhelming you with Kubernetes, but there's an entire CNCF landscape of other projects that we just want you to be aware of. Specifically, when I say SIG storage, I could be talking about Kubernetes SIG storage, or I could be talking about SIG storage that lives at the CNCF level. So just be cognizant that as part of the CNCF, as those projects evolve and get larger and things like that, that you might start seeing some of the similar terminology in those areas as well. So in conclusion, there's a lot going on. It can be overwhelming. So don't try to consume it all at once. Just pick an area and dive in. We've thrown a lot at you this morning, so come to Christoph and Nikita's talk at 4:25 today. It says SIG Contributor Experience Deep Dive. We're planning on having as many members of the SIG there as possible to help you out. There are SIG meetings happening all week throughout KubeCon and CloudNativeCon. You see them on the schedule. So that's just a place that you can attend those meetings if you're interested in those things. The people who are members and contributors of those SIGs are wearing buttons that look like this that says what SIG they are working on. So that's a good way to kind of see what someone's interested in and knowing that you can approach them and let them know, hey, I'm interested in whatever you're interested in to start a conversation. And lastly, please come find us. We're busy, we have lots of people who are in different steps of the journey. Some people have been here since the inception of the project. Some people literally started when they got to KubeCon on their journey. So as we mentioned earlier, the software is going to continue to change all the time, but the people are the things that you take with you. So we look forward to making you part of this wonderful family. Thank you. And it looks like we have time for questions.
We do have time for questions. Any questions?
So I'm curious, is the code tree entirely covered by SIGs, or are there gaps that don't have a SIG associated with them?
So over the course of the last 2 years, we've ensured, so SIGs initially, everything kind of grew organically. And over the past 2 years, the steering committee has been working with SIGs to do a few things. Each SIG has a charter now, so when you go into SIG and you click on those links that I showed you, you'll see a charter of what a SIG is responsible for and what they are not responsible for. And what steering has been working on the past 2 years is ensuring that every piece of code or whatever has an owner. So if you actually browse in the code tree itself, you'll see a little file called owners, and it will say who owns that section of code. And as you go up the tree, it gets bigger and its groups eventually start to show up instead of individuals and things like that. So yes. However, it's not just github.com/Kubernetes/Kubernetes. There's also other parts of the code base inside the GitHub organization that have coverage as well. But yes. That is the goal.
And there's also a separate organization for Kubernetes SIGs, where a lot of the code development happens. It's actually outside of the Kubernetes organization.
Yes.
Are there any underserved SIGs, opportunities for people to jump in and try to help out?
All of them? No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so it depends on your expertise.
Yeah.
Like, I like to tell people, if it's your first day, don't go to API machinery and expect to figure it out, right? There's there's complicated stuff in there. So usually what I tell people is, what are you into? Are you into networking? Are you into, I can't think of a name of a SIG right now. Do you like Amazon? I don't know, whatever you're into. But usually what I tell people is, you might not be sure, show up to a meeting and just hang out. If you really want to pay attention, volunteer to take notes, because then the SIG chair will really appreciate that. And that kind of forces you to pay attention. And if that's not for you, go to your next one, no harm, no foul.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard a SIG say, we just have way too many people trying to contribute. It's a huge problem for us.
We met all of our goals this cycle, absolutely, 100%.
I think all of the SIGs are looking for help in some way or another. And a good place to start out is if you're interested in a particular area, have a look at the Good First Issues in GitHub. So that's a good place to start. But it does depend a lot more on your expertise. So not, like API machinery is not going to be everybody's jam. Same thing with like SIG node. There's some SIGs where you need kind of particular types of expertise.
Yes, there be dragons in there.
Yeah.
And if you do come to the Contributor Experience Deep Dive, we actually do have a contributor guide that tells you, okay, here's how you find a SIG, here's how you find their beginner bugs, which is good first issue bugs. We ask SIGs to maintain a list of help wanted issues, things of that nature. So answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
You had a gentleman in the back too. way in the back.
Can you guys speak a little bit about the community days? I think they were talking about it in the keynote yesterday. Any details of like what those meetings are like?
The community days? I
Yeah.
haven't been involved in any of those.
I literally found out about them when I got here.
Yeah, I mean, I read a little bit about them a while
Yeah.
ago. I guess you can kind of organize them sort of like what they do with DevOps days, where you can organize them in your city. But I haven't really done one, and they're pretty new, so I don't really have any more details.
Yeah.
Does anybody in our little Contribex fan club
Anybody
have
know
any?
anything about community days?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're new.
Ooh, three people in the back. All right.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Kubernetes is obviously a really important milestone in the history of open source, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the structure of the project is different than other projects in the history of open source, and maybe how it's changed over time in its own development as well.
I mean, I would say one of the differences with Kubernetes from a lot of other projects is that the scale is different, right? It's a massive project. So on that hand, it's kind of more similar to things like the Linux kernel, for example. So, and we actually have things kind of organized in similar ways, right? Like the kernel has the maintainers files, Kubernetes has owners files, and this has sort of evolved organically over the history of the project.
Yeah, and I like to add the thing that drew me to Kubernetes initially is it built on the shoulders of giants, and we're able to look at how other projects had, and then made specific decisions about being explicit about things. So in the community repo, there's a file called values.md that says the Kubernetes community values, right? So we say explicitly, community comes first before companies, and we make that explicit. If I was here trying to sell you VMware all day, right, nobody wants to see that, right? An explicit code of conduct immediately as soon as you launched, now we think about that. Back when I started in open source, being friendly to people, it was like a test. You had to run the gauntlet of getting yelled at. And then someday I'll get to yell at someone. And then someone finally realized that if you're just nice to people, it's a lot better, right? So it's things like that were really explicit. The initial Bootstrap committee, when they had their pictures, they did that on purpose, right? And that's one of the reasons that brought me into this community.
Yeah, and we also have really good documentation around what we call the contributor ladder, which is kind of how you move up into additional areas of responsibility within the project. So I feel like that is, I think, documented more clearly than what I've seen in lots of other projects. So it's kind of clear what you need to do to become an org member, which is the first step, and reviewer, and moving on into areas of more and more responsibility. So it is a bit more, I think, egalitarian than some others.
So can you give us an example of one part about the whole SIG process that's working really well? And then one example of something that's not working as well that you guys are trying to remedy or fix?
I'll give one example of what works really, really well is that we have put a lot of discipline around making sure that SIGs are videotaping their meetings and getting them put on YouTube. So if you miss a meeting or if you're in a time zone where the meeting is just not convenient for you, being able to go back and look at previous videos, or if you want to join a SIG and you're kind of curious what happens, you can go back and review the videos. But not just the videos, we also have detailed notes for each one of those. So that's one of the things I think works particularly well.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to share failure. In the 2.5 years that I've been working in Kubernetes, there has always been over 1,000 open pull requests. And nothing really ruins your day than a contributor who's frustrated that shows up and says, hey, I pushed this a year ago and I've tried everything. And then it just saps, the energy out of us. So it's something that we're, at this scale, it's very difficult, right? And trying to ensure that we're assigning PRs to people who are active. So we're constantly trying to clean up owners' files, trying to ensure that people aren't getting overloaded. How do we even it out? How do we make the queue easier? How do we make those overloaded developers be able to mentor new people so they can help out? So that's an area where we're constantly improving. But if you look at the velocity, when people talk about the velocity, it's just, the numbers are crazy. You can't catch everyone, but we do empathize when people have a poor experience.
And that's also a really good way to kind of get involved in a SIG. You can take a look at some of the pull requests that are out there and provide reviews and suggestions and provide people with some feedback. Because in some cases, you don't have to know a ton about the code base and how things work to be able to provide people some good feedback.
Can you put yourself in the shoes of someone who has never contributed, is not involved in any SIGs yet, goes on to github.com, Kubernetes, finds an issue that's labeled good first issue, SIG docs, help wanted, and goes, oh, that sounds like something I could do. And what would be, what you would do?
Yeah, I mean, so we have pretty good contributor documentation. So I can say this because I got involved in the Kubernetes community, I think probably about a year ago. So this is all kind of relatively recent for me from a Kubernetes standpoint. But the docs are pretty good for contributing. So kind of running through the contributor MD files and really sort of just kind of following along with the process, because there's some hoops you need to jump through, CLA signing and things like that. But the other thing I would really encourage you to do if you're brand new, you've picked an issue, you're getting started on it, is to pop into the Slack channel for that SIG. So in this case, SIG docs. Pop into the Slack channel, let people know that you're thinking about working on this issue, see if anybody has any suggestions, and just kind of introduce yourself. And that's also a really good way that if you start working on the change or working on the issue and you run into some problems, then that's also a good place to ask questions.
And I also like to ask first, especially with some of the more complicated. So my first contribution was exactly as you described as SIG docs. It was a larger thing that I wanted to do, but I went to a meeting, I introduced myself. And before grabbing the issue, I kind of mentioned it. Because sometimes we have a problem where you see an issue, you fix it, but you don't have the context of what that rest of the SIG is doing, which could be a bummer. So I introduced myself and I said, hey, I'm gonna work this. And they kind of said, okay, this little area, you're good, work on that. And then as I started to do my pull requests and get easier on it, they knew I was just getting started, so they were supported, and over time I was able to ramp up my contributions. And then at some point, they put you in charge of stuff.
Right, last question, we'll be over time.
Yes, I wanted to go over.
So I think it's interesting perhaps to contribute to Kubernetes and be an open source guy. A lot of cool people are doing it. I'd like to be cool too, but contributing to Kubernetes is not my day job. I understand for some people it is. I've got friends and family I like to see sometimes, and I wouldn't want to just jump in all enthusiastic and then kind of bail. What would you suggest is kind of the right level of attention to expect to give to something like this, and over what time frame in order to kind of not just be some punter who's kind of messing around with people and actually do something solid?
I think it depends. It depends a lot on the amount of time that you have to commit to it. But there are loads of ways you can get involved that are kind of lower time commitments. So one of the things that I do, like if I have an extra 5 or 10 minutes and I'm waiting for a meeting to start, I'll like pop into the issues in Kubernetes community or pull requests and do a couple of quick reviews. So that's something that you can do kind of anytime and doesn't involve a lot of big, heavy time commitments. But I would say be kind of careful about what you do commit to based on the time that you have. So if you don't have a lot of time, like signing up to lead some part of the release is probably not a good idea because you're going to let people down. You're probably not going to want to be on the Contributor Summit organizing team if you don't have a lot of time to commit to that. So I would just say, be realistic about the amount of time that you have to contribute, and then pick some contributions that you think you can reasonably make given the time that you have involved. But you don't need to have like loads of time in order to make really valuable contributions. I mean, I spend a lot of time doing other things at Pivotal related to kind of our like strategy and stuff, and so I don't spend a ton of time in the community. But I feel like I've sort of gotten a good balance for the amount of time that I have to spend and getting benefit in the community.
Yeah, and I have two things to say to that. First, as Kelsey said, I like to be the wingman. I like to be like help other people succeed and things like that. Don't look at people who get paid to work on Kubernetes every day as like the end goal, right? Go at your own pace, right? 1 hour a month, whatever it is you got to do, we're going to appreciate every contribution that you make. Number two, a lot of people that do work on it, we're kind of trained and figure out how to ensure that you don't set yourself up for a trap, right? So like the release team isn't gonna give you a hugely responsible thing unless you've shadowed before and you know what you're doing. So slowly over time, we've kind of ensured that we don't let you paint yourself into a corner, you know, so, yeah.
Cool. So we are out of time. I think there are a few more questions, so feel free to catch them
Yep, and
outside.
yep, SIG Contributor Experience Deep Dive, and the entire team will be there. If you have more questions, they'll be happy to talk to you. So thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.